Hello, and welcome to the Your Food Matters podcast. I'm Dr. Sue Kleiner, here today with my friend and colleague, Eric Bustillo.
Hello, hey everybody. Hey, Sue.
Hey there, Eric, and we are blessed today to have a great guest. Dr. Mike Ormsbee will be joining us. We'll be introducing him in a minute. If you are enjoying our podcast, please share us with your friend and colleagues. Hit that heart, like us, subscribe would be great. You can hear us on all podcast platforms. You can watch us as well as listen to us on the Move Nutrition Network YouTube channel. So we're going to head off today into some exciting conversation, and I'm going to toss it over to Eric to get us started.
Awesome. Thank you, Sue. So for the folks listening and or watching, we have Dr. Mike Ormsbee on today. I've known him for over a decade now, and he's been one of the best people that I've met in the industry as far as nutrition, research, exercise science, and all those things. Definitely consider him one of the best people that I know. And I'm not just saying that to make him sound like he's this amazing person. And behind the scenes, he's not. No, he's awesome. I'm also happy to say that he's a friend of mine, as well as a colleague and someone that I respect and is well respected in the field. So, Mike, thank you for being with us today. I'm super pumped to have you on.
You're welcome, Eric. You're welcome, Susan. Let's get into it. What do you guys want to talk about today?
All right, yeah, let's do it.
Let's hear a little bit about you. We'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Sure. So we can start as far back as you'd like. I guess the most interesting part is like, how do you get involved in this, and sort of where do you start? And so for me, it started as an athlete growing up. My whole life sort of being involved in different parts of sports, and played competitively through high school, and then sort of focused in on ice hockey. Ended up playing ice hockey through college, and I played at Division III school called Skidmore College, and it was while I was there that I took my first exercise science class. And for me, it was one of those things where if I wasn't reading about it in a classroom, I was choosing to read about it on my own. So I knew there was sort of a time and a place for me to get involved in nutrition and exercise sciences. And my mentor there, Paul Arciero, really got me hooked on it, and he's just so passionate about exercise science. In my first class, I remember him up there going and jumping on tables and doing things. And I was like, this is really cool. And so that got me into it. So my bachelor's degree was from Skidmore College in upstate New York. And I did my master's at South Dakota State. And then I did my PhD at East Carolina University with Bob Hickner. So we've been in and around sports supplements, sort of longevity trials, long duration intervention trials with diet, exercise. We manipulate protein a lot in our work, or all the macros. We've done weight loss, we've done weight gain trials, and we do a lot with industry funding as well with sports supplements, and particularly do any of these things work in our hands. We've looked at all types of different things, from proteins to modified carbohydrates to right now we're working with one that we might think actually would mitigate heat stress for people who work in those environments. So kind of all over the place, which is really lucky, because my day job is the director of the Institute of Sports Sciences and Medicine at Florida State University. So I've been at Florida State for 14 years. I'm a professor there. And then 2 years ago became director of the Institute, which is growing rapidly. It's really exciting times, both literally, we're expanding. We have a big remodel going on right now at our facility, which is cool. So a big renovation to add on a research only weight room. We're also adding an immunology, nutrition and exercise immunology facility in our space. And that's because we just hired a new person last year, Dr. Kyle Smith, who's an exercise and nutrition immunologist, which is really cool. So we're growing in all areas. And then we have buckets of research in kind of my forte, which is performance nutrition. And
Mhm.
then we have sports medicine bucket, which we're now pretty soon going to open up and hire a sports medicine researcher just to work with us at the facility. And then we also have clinical research. So a lot of our obesity work falls in that category, but we've also done things with Parkinson's and MS and different aspects of aging. And then the newest bucket that we're adding into our facility is sports psychology, which is not in my wheelhouse, but we have experts at our university that are now working with us. And I'm going to be hiring an associate director to run and lead up the sports psychology side of this. So really full gamut, well-rounded place at the Institute. And it's a place I really want to make sure gets more solidified on the map as the place for performance work in sports medicine and sports sciences. And I think FSU will be the place for that.
Cool.
Wow, that's a lot just kind of going on there. Even like the immunology talk, like because you automatically think like that it's performance nutrition, right? You know, you think performance nutrition, exercise science, only athletes, and all of that. But there's just so much more, and I love that you mentioned the longevity piece too, because that's there's as much as I love sport and performance, there's life after sport, but we still have to be able to perform as a human, you know?
Yeah, I think that we get like a lot of times I've pitched sports medicine or sports sciences in our work, and I call it human performance, as sort of the umbrella term. And I feel like some of the old school mentality is performance just means sports, and that is so far from how I view it. Where I view performance is anybody can improve their performance and needs to improve their performance, and even in our very much our clinical populations, the ability to stand up off the toilet is a performance feat that you need to be able to do. Um,
Absolutely.
and so there's plenty of ways to view performance, but we definitely have this holistic view of it where it's much more than just athletics.
I love that. I love that view and approach. And obviously, there are plenty of studies that go on there, and then plenty of studies that you've been involved with. Um, so I wanted to ask this question about research in particular. Um, and it might sound like a little bit of a silly question because at least for me, I'm kind of like, well, I understand it, but I think people need to have a good understanding behind this because when you talk about research and research studies, um, a lot of people are automatically skeptical. Who paid for it, right? Like we don't need research to tell us that vegetables are good for us and that sort of thing. So the question is, why is it important for studies to be conducted?
Yeah, I think there's sort of a couple of different ways to approach the answer to that. It I get it from the consumer view where we'll do a study that takes us 3 years and $500,000 or more to tell someone that eating less causes weight loss. And it's incredible. But when we do those particular studies, it gives us something to lean on. When we just go at anecdotal evidence, where we pretty much know X is going to cause Y, or this is the direction that we think everybody will lean if they take this supplement or if they do this exercise intervention. Um, until you have data, it doesn't exist. There are no ways to show that it happens. There's nothing to lean on. There's no credibility. And unfortunately, we kind of live in a place that's super skeptical now, uh, and I think COVID sort of amplified this tremendously. But where researchers and scientists and things are scrutinized more than ever, um, and it's a hard place to be. But if you have data, that's the one time that you can show what's actually going on, and it's an interesting time we live in. But if we have some data to back something up, then I think we need to do it. But the other part of your question, Eric, was, do we have, like, how's the funding viewed? And so I think that's another part of the conversation entirely, where we can do the best work ever, and then someone says, "Oh, but you were funded by such and such a company, so that's why you showed what you showed in whatever your paper was." So yeah, is that kind of where you wanted to go with that, Eric?
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely a part of it, right? Because the what you mentioned about um, the skepticism side of things, there, and I'm a skeptical person of things that come out in general, like because I think we should ask questions. Um, I just feel like someone can do really good work, and then what ends up happening is, like you said, it was funded by X, Y, or Z, It was funded by a dairy company. Of course, your results are going to show positive, effects that favor dairy in particular, right? But it's just like, yeah, whey protein, it's going to help with recovery. Like literally, the data are the data. Um, but then on the other side of it is like something else that we're seeing more now is um, uh, like falsification of data and those sorts of things, which is unfortunate because there are amazing researchers, honest researchers. Like that's the number one thing in my opinion is just show what the numbers are, and that's it. And to your point with COVID and all that, not to turn this into a conversation about that, but it's we saw that um there wasn't a lot of transparency at times, and there was a little bit of like we're still learning certain things, and then you find out things like especially retrospectively, like either this person fudged this thing or did that thing, and then now there's even more hesitation and more maybe doubt that people will have about researchers and just research in general, which is it's unfortunate, but I think people also don't understand that, like you said, a study can cost $500,000 or more, right? Or less, like either way. But then it's like, okay, if you want to see something done, then maybe you can help us fund that, because that's a tough part of it. Because as researchers, I think people need to know like a good researcher is going to run a good study, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Going to run a good study, but then also on top of that, just report whatever the data show, and that's one thing that it's like, yeah, maybe, and if you can talk about this too, maybe if it's like a government grant money, yeah, transparency, it's maybe more likely, right? But if it's private funding, can the company just be like, no, we don't want that to get reported, which kind of stinks, because then it's like companies should just be okay with whatever the data show. It is what it is, whether it favors their company
Yeah.
or doesn't. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, so I have some good examples for that on several different fronts. So we are fortunate to have funding from many different sources. Some of those are in-house, like FSU grants specifically. Some of those are from industry funding, and some of those are from federal funding. And so every one of those is a different mechanism to get money to do research, because we cannot do anything if we don't have the funding for it. Okay, so that is something we have to just be aware of. Like, once we get these positions at a university, even a research university, they don't give us the money to run a study. We have to go seek that out. Most of my job is grant writing to try to get funding from companies to do work to answer questions that we want to know about. So that's sort of basic. But what I think is one of the biggest points to make is that universities have many lawyers that work in the facilities. And so once we get a grant or a contract that's, a verbal commitment, let's say, all of that has to translate into a written commitment from the company and from the researchers about what's exactly going to happen. And at least from all the main research universities, we are not allowed to accept money unless we have 100% rights to the data to do anything we want with it. So as soon as that is signed, no matter what we find, good, bad, or indifferent, we have the right to publish that without any say-so from the company. Now, that's the primary mechanism by which most research universities will do their work. Now, there's also the pharmaceutical sort of model, which is different, which is more of a contract. A contract would be if you do research and you're paid to do it, but it's not my question. It's a company coming to you to do the work. And our group doesn't do that kind of work, at least we haven't so far. And so all the grant mechanisms are 100% legally bound that no matter what I find, I have the right to publish that. And I tell you, some companies have backed away once I've said that. And then you kind of get an idea for how much they actually trust their product. The other part of it is when I have conversations, as we always do with company leaders when we're trying to fund a study, is I'll tell them, in 14 years of doing this work, I have a very good record of finding nothing. I mean, I can't tell you how many supplements I've looked at where absolutely nothing happens. And so I often joke about it, but my students will come to me and they'll say, "Oh my goodness, I did all of this work and nothing happened from a supplement," let's say. And we have to be able to phrase that as, that's good. The consumer needs to know that this product does not work, or at least in this population or for this purpose, or whatever your question was. But in our area, no data or negative data or a null finding doesn't mean you can't publish it. It means you should, in my mind, you should publish it in order for people to understand how many supplements actually do not work, and then you can really hone in on the ones that you think could actually improve your performance or your health, for the outcomes that you're actually searching for. And so, I think, again, the bottom line is here that from a research perspective, I can't do the work unless I have 100% rights to the data. And then two, like, my job depends upon publishing. So no way would I do all that work and not publish a paper. I have to do that to keep my job. And so there's I think some things that the consumer might not know. And so I always hate it when I see comments like, "Oh, but it's, like you said, funded by the dairy industry or funded by the peanut corporation," or whatever it is. Like, all right, there's probably a million different ways in which this data is legitimate. But like anything, a few bad apples sort of ruin it. And that could be industry funding, that could be federal funding. There are examples everywhere where that is sort of mismanaged and misinterpreted, or even intentionally misinterpreted. But it's not as rampant as you'd like to think. But although I do agree with you, we need some skepticism on no matter what we do. That's why we're scientists. You look at it and, I don't know, did they do that right? Did they do that right? And so, with all that said, I'll tell you, I often tell my students, like, I'm training you to be hypercritical, like to hammer every single paper you see that they didn't do this and they didn't do this. And I said, before you do that, take a step back and realize how much work that was. That was somebody's life for many years to get all that data collected. And let's give them the benefit of the doubt. They're trying to do this with the resources they have and the funding they got for this. And it's a hard job to do this really well. And no matter what you do, it's not going to be perfect for every question.
So, Mike, it's really interesting thinking about university research labs and the requirements that you have about publishing demand versus the private clinical research
Yeah.
laboratories, because brands love to go to the private labs because the brand can still own the data if they prefer it to be that way, which means we may or may not ever see the results of those studies.
Yeah. It becomes a problem when I think a company doesn't trust their product enough to do it in a way where the data is forthcoming. But I understand. I mean, like, if I'm expending a ton of money to produce a product and you're not sure, then maybe that's why they choose that route where it's up to their discretion how they do it. But normally I have these conversations with the teams, and someone will bring that up for doing work with our group, let's say, and then I'll say, but isn't brand loyalty like what you're looking for? Wouldn't they like it if you did a dosing study and then you said, hey, it turns out that this dose is ineffective, or it's too much, or you can get away with half of that dose and have the same effect? And they're like, oh, well, then we don't sell as much. And I'm like, yeah, but you're loyal to your customer. You're going to keep them as customers by being honest and straightforward with them. Not everybody thinks that way. So I do understand why some companies might do it. But yeah, there is a difference. And you can tell sometimes by who the authors are, because it will list in every paper where the work was done and who the corresponding author is. And so let's say you're not a researcher and you're listening to this podcast. If you simply Google a title, it'll come up probably in PubMed or Google Scholar, and you can see who did the paper and where it was done. Who were the lead people involved, and that usually gives you a pretty good hint as to what Susan's describing, like what might be not published in terms of like freedom to publish everything that you possibly find, or just the things they want to show. And there's a difference.
Right. Well, and the real issue is the stuff that doesn't get published, right? So nobody ever knows. And that's kind of the history of alcohol research, that for, 2 decades while we were saying we were doing research, and research was being published that was positive, look at all these health benefits of drinking alcohol. The negative consequences of drinking weren't being published because the studies were all being done at private clinical research labs. And
Mm.
so the stuff that looked good for the industry got published. The stuff that looked bad for the industry didn't get published. And it wasn't until research was funded by NIH at at public institutions that all of a sudden we have reams of studies coming out showing negative consequences, health consequences of alcohol. So yeah, I mean there's real societal health issues around not having data published.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because it just undermines, I think, what everyone's trying to do in our fields, and I think it provides more legitimacy to the people who are not only skeptical but just against actual scientists and science. It's there's no good answer to it other than start looking at where the research is actually coming from. It doesn't mean that a private clinical place doesn't do great work and also doesn't
Right,
have legitimate data. It just
right.
means maybe there's more to the story.
Right, right. So kind of as we're in the research scientist
Yeah.
mode here, I'm really curious. You're educating and sort of bringing up a new generation of scientists as graduate students come through your program and your
Yeah.
labs. So, we've seen in our career lifetimes huge changes in particularly technology, driving new methodologies, leading to new questions, and um, ethical issues as well in the types of research that we do, the way we conduct research, even animal research versus
Yeah.
human research, et cetera. So, how do you prepare new scientists for all the things that we don't even know will be coming in during their careers lifetimes? How do we prepare them for all of these questions?
Yeah, I don't think there's a real great answer to that, Susan, because we don't know what obviously will be coming 10 years down the line. But I'll tell you this, in our situation as university faculty and research professors working closely with doctoral students and master students and undergraduates, not to mention postdocs and volunteers and technicians of every level, we're trying to teach people how to think, not necessarily a specific technique, although they'll get that for sure. And as long as we can teach critical thought and how they actually work through a problem, in my mind, that's the core skill. And it's you can layer in these different technologies as they grow and develop with the demand of the world. But I don't know that there's one good way. I'll tell you what we've done. As I learn a new technology, or I hear about it and it's directly related to some line of work we're in, maybe it's a better technique. And if I don't do that technique, now I'm not giving the best training to my own students. And
Hmm.
so we are constantly upgrading our technology to be better as we move along. And I think just seeing my students seeing that example where, all right, we can do it this way, but there's a better technology that is more trusted now. So we're going to try this new one. That is something they just learn by example. That there's more out there. There's more we can do.
Hmm.
I'll give you another example. So we were stuck in this a COVID pause of research, and our team had to swivel, pivot and swerve and swivel immediately to try to get some more data going. We had students trying to finish, and that's when we moved into wearable technologies. We were not using them very well. We had
Oh,
access to them,
uh-huh.
but we
Uh-huh.
were not using them to our fullest ability. And so that's when our associate director of sports science research, her name's Elisa Angela, she's fabulous. She works directly with athletes and she's also involved with us on the academic side. They were using Whoop bands at the time. And so she brought that to our attention. And then I ended up writing a grant with her and some others to Whoop. And that's when we ended up getting funded using a new technology that we were not using and implemented that into our culture and our laboratory base. And now we use it in many of our studies that are ongoing. Same thing with continual glucose monitors. We had access to them a few years ago. We were using some brands that would expire after just a few days. And then we want to do more longitudinal studies. So we found different versions of these that would test
Mm-hmm.
for longer periods of time, 7 days, for example, or longer. And so we're shifting with the times, and we're still with the primary skill set of how do you solve a problem? How do you ask a good question? How do you answer it? And then we
Right.
layer in the technologies. And I think the third piece of that is outstanding communication and professionalism so that you can have collaborations with true experts. And what
Mm-hmm.
I mean is that I don't need to be the expert in everything because I know that Eric's an expert in his area, Susan's an expert in her area, and they're friends with me. So let's team up and do something together so that I can pull on other people's expertises. And I think at our Institute of Sports Sciences and Medicine, we collaborate really well. We have people who want to work with us. We have other people that we want to work with, and we share technologies. We share skill sets across the board, and we do training for people who want to learn something that we're up to. Or, for example, I'm on sabbatical now, and so you can use that time to go learn a new technique and bring it back to your facility.
Mm-hmm.
So there are many different ways to do it, but I think if you forget the most basic of things, just like exercise training, you don't need to do the most highfalutin thing first. You need to teach someone how to ask a question and answer that question.
Cool.
Yeah, really well said. Speaking of wearables, I wanted to ask you, the wearables and fitness trackers, they've become extremely popular.
Yeah.
Um, and maybe this isn't the right question or the right way to ask it, but um, are are they useful? Is the information helpful, beneficial, accurate? Like, does that matter?
Hmm. Oh, yeah. So are they useful? I think they're useful. Are they accurate? Depends what you're using. Um, and a lot of times it's kind of like body composition, ways to measure body composition. It's like if you measure on the same tool every time, then you can at least track patterns. And that pattern can be useful to that athlete. So in that way, I think that's good. Now, some of the technologies are better than others. There's some that compare, they're really good at one thing, let's say sleep or sleep tracking or actigraphy, and others are better at heart rate or heart rate variability. And then some do everything, and it's all built into one. And that's very convenient, and convenient is a part of life. Most of us crave convenience and do everything for a convenience factor. So you can't discount those. But again, I think it's probably most useful from like an individual to an individual using that same technology, the same time of day, for example, the same procedures every single time. Now, one of the things that we found really useful has been questioned in the media. So one of those was we used the Whoop bands to early detect COVID-19 during that pandemic. That was our first study that we did during that time. And we had athletes, they're all female athletes that were wearing these bands. So the data was specific to females, although I think it would apply across the board. And of the athletes that were wearing the band consistently, we had some of them that wore it all the time. So we had really good longitudinal data on them. And those individuals, about 3 days before a positive test, had several markers change that were big enough that the sports scientists and strength and conditioning coaches would pull them out of practice and isolate them and then test them 2 days later or 3 days later. And sure enough, 14 out of 16 times they were right.
Wow.
And those people were testing positive based on a change in respiratory rate that was happening 3 days before that. So we just published that paper the end of last year,
Yeah.
and it's really neat. Now the question was, could it have been a false positive? Yes, there's definitely times when those things will change because an athlete had some weird thing happen, a lot of stress. They could have gone out drinking or something, and you'll see some of these same markers change. But by and large, at least in our hands, we were able to see a pretty good pattern that existed. And sometimes they'd pull them out of, two of those times they pulled them out and it wasn't a positive. The question would be, could it be for anything? Could it be for like a flu or a cold? Maybe we didn't test it for that at the time. That wasn't the hot topic. So I think you could probably repeat something like that with the common cold or a flu. Um, However, it does bring up like technology is really helpful. But I'll say this, Eric, because I think this is where you're going with this is that technology is only useful enough if the person who's interpreting it is knowledgeable and knows the athlete. And so in this context, um, if you're the coach, you've got to go to that athlete and say, what happened? Did you go out last night or not? Let's get to the bottom of this. If you're interpreting that wrong, you also might be pulling someone out of a game that shouldn't be out of a game, and then your coach isn't happy. Your sport coach and your team may suffer from it. So it really does need a trained professional, a sports dietitian, a sports scientist, a strength and conditioning coach, whoever is on the ground, athletic trainer maybe, to be interpreting those data, and using the technology for what it is, a tool to help the human interpret those things and make the best choices.
For sure. Yeah, for me especially, in seeing the craze of it all, and like when people freak out like because they didn't have their whatever wearable on
Yeah.
while they were working out, and they're like, "Oh my god," it's like they stress out about that, and I'm just like, you worked
Yeah.
out anyway. Like, it actually counts. Like it doesn't have to be on Instagram or on your app.
Yeah, so I'll tell you two things that were interesting with that. Is I was speaking with, I think we all have this mutual friend who's a strength coach and a sports art dietitian for professional football, and they were doing a lot of tracking and a lot of questionnaires too about a lot of different things, and the intent was good. It was to identify problems and maybe alter training or whatever. But what it did is it made people hyper aware, where they're saying, um, I don't feel bad, but my watch tells me I do. And so now they feel bad. And then it's like, do you want that information before a game? Or do you remove that and it's say, I don't want to know that I slept bad. I can't do anything about that. I have a game today. And so it really, you need to know the person. How do they respond to it? How do they use the data? How often are they checking it? And just personally, being part of this, was able to wear one of the bands for some time. This was in 2020 to 2022, and I have small children, and so my sleep was never good. I would wake up and it would say, "Don't work out. You're in the red. Don't work out." I'm like, I don't have any other time. I have to work out, and it kept on every single day. Finally, I took it off because I was like, I don't want to see that every day. And for me, it was not helpful. I knew these things were a problem. I don't want to put a number on it. Let me just get my training in when I can. Now, I'm no professional athlete or whatever, but some people don't need all that information all the time.
Yeah, I get that, and I'm with you on that. And yeah, maybe you're no professional athlete, but I know you're pretty good at CrossFit. So I uh, I actually had a question that I wanted to ask you when it comes to CrossFit in particular. It's totally like nothing to do with the wearables and stuff.
Yeah.
Um, why do you think CrossFit has like still to this day still gets a lot of hate?
Yeah, I feel like, at least in the circles that I run, I think I see that changing. I don't think it's as bad as it was a few years ago.
Hmm.
Um, I think it grew out of this like intensity driven piece where exercise science folks or people used to bodybuilding didn't like that it wasn't maybe programmed as much, at least from an outside perspective. But if you're actually in a box, there is programming, and it does tell you it's when you drop in one day and don't come back for a month and drop in again. It's so different that I think they're like, oh, what is this? It's whatever you want. It's chaos. It's too much weight. And just like anything, a few bad eggs will sort of ruin it all. And many of the boxes have very good trainers that will progress you, won't let you add more weight until you can handle the weight as
Yep.
as it should be. So I think that has changed, um, but I still view it as like this cultish type of community. And um, it's just you usually tell if someone's in CrossFit because they tell you about it. They love it. They talk about it a lot. And so
The
I don't
opposite of
know.
Fight Club.
Yes, it's yeah, exactly.
It's
Yeah,
not
it's no
everyone.
fight club. Everyone talks about it, because there is a cool community there. It's fun. It's competitive. And these people are highly fit at all different levels. So I think the rep came from maybe injuries, um, maybe being a sport that really was a hybrid of all these other activities and sports that I don't know if it made people jealous or what. These people are insanely fit. Um,
Hmm. Yeah,
And I think if you look at the data, there are injuries in any type of lifting and any type of sport, including CrossFit, but also everything else.
for sure.
I think that's kind of where it stems from. And but I do think it's better than it was a few years ago.
Yeah, yeah, and I see that too. I see that it is getting better, less hate and all of that stuff. And I tell people all the time, it's not like I'm not sponsored by them in any way. I'm not like an evangelist, if you will, of CrossFit. I think any form of fitness that keeps you doing it is beneficial. Um, and you know, I actually I co-presented with Dr. Yuri Feito at
Hmm.
the ISSN conference last year, and we were talking about CrossFit, nutrition for CrossFit, and he was a part of a study where they actually found people who did CrossFit more regularly um, had less injury. Like the people who were doing it like twice a week versus the people that were doing it like 3 times or more. I mean, I might be fudging up the numbers right now, um, but the 2 times a week participants, and it might have been like survey data, so observational, so you know, do with that as well. But yeah, the likelihood of injury was higher in people doing it less than the people who were just like frequent goers, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think that's typically the case, right? These new unaccustomed movements aren't always new and unaccustomed if you're doing them all the time. And so maybe you just kind of get some kind of grease the groove there, where you keep doing it, and then all of a sudden you feel good with it. You don't have as many injuries. You're used to those movements. But some of it's pride, man. Like I have trouble with it if I haven't been in a box for a while, which I often do training at home, so it's kind of in a box or not. Then I get in there and I'm next to people who are just going for it, and I know something in my head's like, oh, I gotta compete, and then the other side's like, pull it back. You're going to get hurt. You got a gray beard now. Like, take it easy. um, and so it is hard, and you have to know yourself and trust yourself to pull back too. So, we got to take ownership of our own issues. It's not just the gym and just the trainer. Like, if you're not capable, don't do it. Like, you need to pull back. And I think at the end of the day, I've never been at a box where someone scaled and was made fun of ever. Not once.
yep.
You scale, you do the activity. You know what else happens at the end? You get a hug and a high five, and everyone's excited.
That's it.
Um, and so I think that that's something that's self. You've really got to take it on yourself to pull back when if you have any inkling that you should be. Really make yourself do it, which is it's harder. I know that's harder said, harder done than said.
For sure, most definitely. It's tough to make modifications and all that and whatever else. But yeah, I appreciate your insights. Um, so we're gonna be wrapping up in a few minutes or so. So I was kind of hoping that we could do a little bit of like a lightning round, just asking you some nutrition questions and things along those lines. I know that relatively recently the the pre sleep feeding and protein stuff um, got a good bit of traction. So I did want to ask you just a little bit about that. If you can kind of give the listeners findings, like we think eating before bedtime is bad for us. Does that like increase your metabolism, slow it down, fat storage, performance? If you don't mind, some bullet points on that could be awesome.
Yeah, sure. So our lab does, as we said earlier, like a lot of different areas of work, which I love that we're able to do that. But probably the thing we're most well known for is our pre-sleep feeding. About, oh man, almost 15 years ago, we were one of two labs involved in this type of work. It was us and a lab out of Europe. Now Jorn Trommelen and Luke Van Loon and these guys are doing some really great work with muscle metabolism. And we took the other side of this, much more applied approach, uh, whole body metabolism, fat metabolism specifically, some performance and recovery and sleep, more of these applied aspects to eating before bed. So of all of that work over all these years, we found a couple of things hold true. And it's true so long as what you're eating is a protein centric small meal, maybe even called a snack. We're looking at less than 200 calories and predominantly protein as what you're eating. And if that's the case, eating before bed in all of the literature to date has not been negative in any way. There's been no negative outcomes on sleep that have been documented. There's been no negative outcomes on metabolism. In fact, some studies show an improvement in morning metabolism. There's been data that looks at fat metabolism specifically, where we put probes into your belly fat and see what's happening there. Are you stopping the ability to burn fat while you're asleep? No, none of that's been the case. And so what we use it mostly for now is an extra chance to feed a protein meal. So if you're low on the day and you know you need an extra feeding, it will probably benefit you to get that extra feeding in, and that will not harm your ability to lose fat, fat metabolism, or anything. It's just one more chance to feed in a particular day is sort of the bottom line from it. In terms of performance, what's really cool is probably the last 8 years, an explosion of research in this area has come out of labs all over the world. And for me, that's super exciting because it means what we started was meaningful. And now, I mean, I tell you, every 2 weeks, I'm reading a new study in this space. And so it's accelerating how fast we learn about different things in this space, which is really cool. What I still see is a lot of people saying, don't eat before bed. Your sleep gets messed up. It's a sleep problem. I've seen big companies post this online too. Big companies, a lot of athletes would follow. Don't eat before bed. But that's not true, because if you're an athlete and you compete again tomorrow, and I exercise or my games at night, what am I going to do? Not eat before bed? I need to eat to refuel because I have to compete again tomorrow or practice again tomorrow. We forget about fueling the next day's performance. And so I think that notion is just so misguided to just do a blanket don't eat before bed. It's like, in what context and for
Yeah,
who?
it's so interesting because working one-on-one with individuals out there in the world who burn a lot of calories, they're going to wake up because they're hungry in the middle of the night. So eating before bed is actually helpful to keep them sleeping.
No doubt about it. We worked with Ultraman Florida several times, and these people race almost continuously over 3 full days. And at the end of the day, they finish a certain segment. They do get a little bit of time to sleep, but they better eat. I mean, they have to be eating right when they finish to fuel, because tomorrow they're running a double marathon or they're riding their bike 200 miles or whatever it is. So definitely the context is critical here. Also, in like the bodybuilding world, figure world, some people purposefully set an alarm, wake
Right,
up in the middle of the night and drink a
right.
protein shake or eat a meal. And so if and that's never been done, where you give food before bed versus waking up in the night to take it longitudinally, which would be a cool study to look at. But so far, we've not seen it interrupt sleep, and we've had from the very beginning, we didn't measure it at all. Reviewers starts asking us about it, so we put in a questionnaire. That wasn't enough, so we added some technologies to it to measure it. That wasn't enough because it was always like a second or third aim in my work, in our lab's work. And so right now, actually starting yesterday, my team's back there. Kieran Patterson's leading that up, one of our master students, working with the athletes at FSU, and we're looking at 3 consecutive days of pre-sleep feeding instead of one, because we were criticized that we were doing one night only. So it's 3 consecutive days. It's female athletes only, and it is using a new protein well, it's not new, but it's kind of newly branded alpha
Oh, sure.
lactalbumin, these
Yeah,
alpha lac proteins. And so it has a high percentage of
right.
tryptophan, which is thought to help with sleep. And so there's been 2 studies in it so far in rugby teams and simulated games. It looks like it's improving sleep. And we're giving it 1 week, we're giving casein 1 week, and we're giving a placebo 1 week. And it's all blinded to everybody 3 nights in a row. We put continual glucose monitors on them so we can tell compliance as well through the evening and through those 3 days. And so, but our primary outcome is sleep. That's the most important thing that we've designed this study to look at. And so finally, we'll be able to say it doesn't do anything, or it helps, or it hurts. And I'm looking forward to it, because if what I've been telling people to do for 10 years, which is eat a pre-sleep protein drink, is messing with sleep, we need to know that so that we can change our recommendations, because we don't want that part of it. We have to figure out a new solution. So I'm interested to see what we find from these data in elite athletes and in female athletes
Oh,
too.
yeah. You've got some star students in your lab there. Yeah, good stuff.
I do. I'm
Good
so
stuff.
fortunate, Susan. They're so good. They're so good. From the very beginning. I mean, what's really cool is they all go out into different careers. We sit down the first week and we say, what do you want out of this experience? Where do you want to go? And I have some that want to be big researchers, and I have some that don't want to do research at all. They just know they need to do this to get to the end
Mm-hmm.
that they want. Some are in sports science with professional teams. Some are professional sports dietitians, and some are industry folks, making or doing quality control for supplements and that type of thing.
Yeah, and also I will say this: they're lucky to have you as well as a mentor to just kind of lead the team. So I think it's important to say that. Um, I was curious to ask what would you expect to see on the CGM, on the continuous glucose monitor, um, in that study, as far as them taking in the alpha lactalbumin, the casein, the
Yeah.
placebo. What would you expect?
So we have a fourth group that's carbohydrate as well. So I should see variation in that glucose, which is expected. What I can also use that for is, did they have anything afterwards? So if they're drinking the shake with us and then they go have pizza, I'll be able to tell. And so they do a food log, but I'll see it. Like I'll be able to see exactly if there's any interruptions in that. So I expect it to be low, highest with carbohydrate, lowest with the placebo, and then some variation with the alpha lac and the casein. But I don't think it'll be a problem. I just want to look at it. It's never been done, and I want to be able to sort of correlate those changes that might occur with all different sleep outcomes that we get.
I gotcha. Yeah, because it's always interesting to me when people kind of talk about like protein and carbs and even like insulin and all that. And of course, there's always individuality, right? So it could vary depending on the person and how they would respond. Um, but I find that protein a lot of times acts as this like a for lack of a better word. I hope nobody takes this and runs with it, but like lack of like a it's almost like a sugar suppressant in a way. Like it doesn't really cause these huge sugar spikes, if any. If anything, it helps keep them stable and normalized. Um, and the reason I mentioned like the talks about carbohydrates and insulin and so on and so forth, because people will make those arguments for carbs being bad and they spike your insulin and whatever else. And I'm like, well, yeah, so does a whey protein shake. And if anything, maybe it's good in some cases that it's doing that, because maybe if someone does have elevated sugar levels, maybe like a type 2, someone's type 2 diabetes, um, maybe now that protein shake almost acts like a medication for them and it helps keep it under control from a positive insulin response in this case. You know what I'm saying? So I was curious to hear what you would expect to see in the.
Yeah, I think we will see insulin. Oh, well, this case will be glucose variations that are occurring from taking those, but in no way is that a negative to me. That's what happens. You eat, glucose goes up, and then it comes back down. The problem is when it's continually up for a very long period of time, and you have insulin up, and you cause all these cascades of problems. But from our hands, I just want to see what it does at this time of night, because typically feeding studies are done in the day or in the morning. There's not a lot that are done right before bed, and then you don't know how the glucose responds to it. So I'm interested to see that, and how long does it stay elevated? Oral glucose tolerance tests are typically 2 or 3 hours, depending on which method you're using. And then as that comes down, everything's normal. And then again, the biggest reason, or a big reason for us, is just compliance in general, because while they have this on, anytime they eat and they're recording a time and what they eat, I'll have a glucose variation because they wear these things the entire time they're in the study. So it's not just the nighttime period, it's the whole rest of the day as well. It just gives us new insight that we haven't had in this particular type of a design that's solely focused, well, not solely, but primarily focused on sleep outcomes.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's going to be exciting to see what ends up happening with that. All right, the last question before the last question,
Okay.
and it's really not much of a question. It's more of just like a debunking. If you can, and now if you could think of some from people that you've worked with, from because, and I'm gonna ask you to plug this if it's still something that you're doing, like the great courses, unless they've changed the name now. Because in doing something along those lines, either people reaching out and putting that together, but also working with collegiate athletes, can you debunk 3 maybe common myths that you see quite regularly or often just to maybe help these collegiate athletes and really anyone listening to this that can benefit from some good information from a researcher in the field.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there'd probably be quite a few if I had time to sit down and think through a whole bunch of them. I think the top one that comes to mind is that many athletes have been, especially at the Division I level, have been so good for so long, and when they're younger, maybe nutrition didn't matter as much. They ate whatever they wanted, good, bad, or ugly, and they were still the best, always the best out there. So they got in their mind that I'm great no matter what I do. It's going to be fantastic. I mean, I remember the first time going into a locker room of professional athletes, semi-professional athletes. It's full of fast food wrappers and stuff. They're not any different than normal folks. They were fueling like that, and I was surprised. I thought it would be perfect, and it's just not. That's not how it goes. And so um, I think that's a myth that they're so good that nutrition doesn't matter. I think it will matter. It just depends on what phase of the game or what stage of their life they're in terms of when it would catch up with them. But I do think that that's probably the biggest one where they're just always been so good. And it's like, oh, I don't need to do that. I'm the best player out here. Well, guess what? Now there's 12 other people out here that were also the best ever. Don't you want that advantage that you can get, even if it's only 3, 4, 5, 10%? Take that advantage. Like, my goodness, help with that recovery piece at least, or whatever it is. So that's probably number one.
For sure.
I still hear questions a lot, believe it or not, about protein and that too much of it will harm them. And I just find that astonishing in this context, and particularly with athletes who need sort of a higher level intake, or just are typically recommended a higher level intake. They're still hearing that too much is a bad thing. They don't want to have too much and their kidneys are going to explode or whatever. So I still hear that. And then on the other side, probably, I guess it's with everybody, but maybe more with our female athletes. I hear more conversations around carbohydrates, and specifically carbohydrates and body composition. And so I guess that the general myth um, is around physique and what physique drives performance. And I think that the error, maybe not a myth, but the error that many people make is training maybe to be very lean or have a six pack or something, when that's not what the sport demands require. And so you get caught. And I did this too. I mean, even just playing sports, like I always wanted to be, the muscle magazine guy. And I probably should have trained slightly differently to be better at my sport, looking back at it. And so I would hope that some athletes can sort of get that in their mind, that you have to have the ideal composition for your sport, not to be on a magazine or whatever is the most popular thing at that time.
For sure. Yeah, almost like the performance nutrition versus physique nutrition
Yeah.
kind of conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think we just got to start getting into all these colleges and giving lectures and helping these people just learn these things, man. Goodness. Okay, awesome. Thank you for those. So now the final question I like to ask everybody when we have a guest on: if you could eat a meal with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be, and what would you eat?
Mm-hmm. You mean besides Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce?
I'm like so sick and tired of hearing the Taylor Swift stuff now with the Super Bowl. Like, oh my goodness. And I'm a Swiftie. I'm like, goodness gracious.
I don't know. That's a good question, Eric. I think you could go many ways with that. You could go religious, you could go historical, what drives you. It's funny because probably one of the things I complain about is not being able to have a meal with my core family because my kids are up running around, up and down, bouncing off the walls. But I'm also aware enough that I'm going to miss that one day. And so I would probably just choose my routine because it's everything to me. And one day I'm going to miss that piece where the girls are climbing under the table and pulling my feet and the whole thing. So I would probably just stick with the dad routine.
I love that, man. That's awesome. Yeah, thanks for that. So just to finish up, where can people find you? Social media again. Feel free to plug anything, the courses and all of that.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I appreciate that. You mentioned the great courses. So if people are interested in more of an academic lecture style series, that's where they could find that. I've got a lot of great feedback on that course. It's called Changing Body Composition Through Diet and Exercise, which is not a sexy name, it's just what it is. That was built through a company called The Great Courses, which was bought by a company called Wondrium. And so they have all kinds of courses on anything you can imagine from an academic perspective. And what they've done is they made them into 30-minute lectures. It's on Audible, or you can watch it on Amazon or buy it from Wondrium. But if you like to listen to things while you're driving around, it's 24 30-minute lectures,
Wow.
just like a course. It's a syllabus, and it's 24 different topics. And it's designed for people who care a little bit about science, but you don't have to be a scientist or even have taken a chemistry class to understand it. It's designed to be for everybody. So that's a great resource if you really want to dig into it, like some nuts and bolts, but in a comfortable way, but more of an academic type of setting. Um, if you like to read, I have a textbook. So I'm the co-author on a new exercise physiology textbook. Actually, it's not new; it's just a new edition. It's the sixth edition of exercise physiology. It was written by Denise Smith. She's our lead, and Sharon Plowman. They've written 5 editions of this. They asked me to come on for the sixth one to update many of the sections that I'm very familiar with. So that's a cool resource just out now that you could get. Also just Google exercise physiology in Ormsbee and you'd get that if you're an academic. And then lastly, if you just want to see what the lab's up to and what I'm up to on social media, it's just at Mike Ormsbee. And you can check that on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or whatever. And I post things about the lab, the institute, speaking engagements. When this podcast comes out, I'll repost it for you guys out there. But yeah,
awesome.
that's where you can find me day to day.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. Really appreciate that. Thanks for taking the time today. Yeah, I appreciate you and your work and the work that you're continuously doing, and of course your friendship. And to everyone listening, I'm not sure. Sue, are you there? I don't think she can. I know she's been having some internet issues. But thank you everyone for tuning in. This is the Your Food Matters podcast. Remember, click that like, share, subscribe button. Share it with your friends. Let them know what we're up to, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Peace.